This is John, and today is the last video I will be doing on the IELTS speaking test. And in this one, we're going to look at actual questions from part 3 of the exam, and I'll give you my model answers as well as explaining why I think they're good and how you can try to repeat this yourself. So just a quick recap of the last video. You will get roughly 8 questions in part 3 of the exam, and these will be on a similar topic as in part 2. You'll have around 40 seconds to answer each question, and you want to give as much detail as you can and also reasons or examples for everything you say. So I have an example here of the progression you might see in part 3 of the test. You'll notice how all the questions are linked, so they have a similar topic, and they also will often become more difficult as it goes on. I've just given 3 examples here, but normally, like I said, you'll have 48. So the first one is, what kinds of possessions give status to people in your country? Then they might ask you, has it always been the same, or were different possessions thought of as valuable in the past? And then, why do you think people need to show their status in society? So it's perfectly okay to struggle with some questions. Some of those questions are really difficult. Even for me, I have to think a lot. So just try your best to answer it, and just know that if you're giving good answers in the test, the examiner will notice this, and they will ask you harder questions to see if you fit into the highest levels of the band system in the IELTS test. So it could actually be a good thing that you're getting asked hard questions. I also just want to mention the next few questions I'll show with my examples of how to answer it will all be on different topics and different questions. So it's just to show you the different range you can get. However, in your actual tests, the questions will all be linked, similar to what these ones are. So let's start on the first one. Has it always been the same, or were different possessions thought of as valuable in the past? So this is actually one of the questions on the last slide, and it is quite hard. So you can pause the video and read each part of my answer, and then I'll explain it. So for this one, I used one of those phrases I showed in a previous video that can give you some extra time to think. So if you've already spent 2 or 3 seconds thinking this question and you can't think of anything, you can use this phrase, "That's a good question, let me think for a second." So I say that, and then I also give my opinion. So next I reference something from a previous question. So you can always mention something you talked about in a previous question. This is good. It can even give you some higher marks maybe, because it shows a higher level of English skill. And I use this to back up my opinion with an example. And lastly, I give a suggestion as to what I believe would have been valuable in the past. And I even mention about how that is still valuable today. So this is one of those questions that will definitely be hard, but not all of them will be so difficult. So the next one we have here is, why do some companies ask their staff to wear uniforms? So you're being asked about your opinion. Here I give mine. I paraphrase the question slightly, and just in case you don't know here, for instance, just means because. Next, I give some examples supporting my opinion from my everyday life. Again, this doesn't have to be a true example. You can just make this up, but it does seem believable and it will help show off your English skill. And now I'm giving some more detail and a second reason why I have this opinion about uniforms. I will say as well that, again, you can add in extra things to this answer. This answer, you have around 40 seconds to give as much detail as you want, so you can definitely add in another opinion or example. So the third one then, are there any disadvantages to shopping on the internet? Alright, so I use paraphrasing here, and I have given my own opinion. And I actually give the counter to my own opinion, so the opposite of my own opinion here. And like I mentioned in the previous video, this is good to use different opinions because you're not trying to convince the examiner, you're just trying to show off your English skill, and showing other opinions is a good way to do this. But I do mention at the very end here, finding clothes that fits properly is difficult. So I'm getting back to why I believe what I believe. And here I give my example. from real life. Again, you can make it up if you want, and this is showing off why I have my opinion. And lastly, I give a statistic. So I have just made this up to support my answer, and using a statistic like this helps improve or helps to show off your English skill. And again, the statistic backs up my opinion. And here we have the very last example I'll go through. What improvements have been made to transport in your country in recent years? So I've started off the question quite basic here. It's perfectly fine to do that as long as your other answers show more advanced techniques or more fancy ways of starting the question. And again, I state my opinion. I give an example showing why my opinion is right or why I think it is right and why public or at least transport improvements have been useful. And then lastly, I give a counter to my argument. I talk about some reasons why these improvements may not be useful. I mention some other people's opinions. Again, this will give you good marks by mentioning that. And I even compare my opinion and theirs. And just as a final point here, you can just lie and make up opinions. Again, it's perfectly fine to do that to show off your skill. And when answering these questions, you just want to include as much detail as you can. Don't worry if sometimes you have nothing to say or very little to say. Just try your best. Remember, I'm a native speaker, so my examples are hopefully pretty good and would give me a high mark. But you can get a good band in your IELTS with answers that don't have as much detail, but just try to include as much as you can. So that is the last video of the IELTS series. I hope you found these videos useful, and I hope they can give you a good grade in your tests. And as always, thank you very much for watching.